In 1876, in a Deadwood saloon, thick with gun smoke and cigar haze, the bartender laid out a free lunch so heavily salted that grown men drank 4 beers just to wash down a single plate. That was the whole idea. The bloodiest saloons of the Old West were not restaurants. They were traps built to make you thirsty, and the food was the bait. Most people picture gunslingers eating thick steaks under the stars. The truth is far stranger. Number 14 on this list was so vile that visiting Easterners refused to name it in print. Number 3 is being resurrected by craft bartenders in New York right now, and they have no idea where it came from. These are the 25 meals Outlaws actually ate before the gunfights. Hit that subscribe button and let us count them down. Number 25, pickled eggs. Walk into any frontier saloon and the first thing you saw on the bar was a wide-mouthed glass jar packed with eggs swimming in cloudy vinegar brine. Pickled eggs were the cornerstone of saloon food because they did 3 things at once. They lasted for weeks without spoiling. They cost almost nothing, and the salt and vinegar made a man powerfully thirsty for the next round. A bartender could buy eggs by the crate for pennies, boil them, and drop them into a crock of vinegar, salt, and spice that sat on the bar for the better part of a month. A single egg sold for a nickel or came free with a drink. Cowboys fished them out with grimy fingers between hands of Pharaoh. They were rubbery, sharp, and oddly satisfying after a day eating dust. Half the gunfighters in Dodge City had the taste of vinegar on their breath when they drew. Number 24, rat trap cheese and soda crackers. The free lunch counter always held a wheel of hard yellow cheese so sharp and crumbly that cowboys called it rat trap cheese, set beside a barrel of dry soda crackers. It was the cheapest protein a saloon keeper could put out, and it was strategic. The cheese was aggressively salty. The crackers were bone dry. Together they coated a man's mouth and throat until the only cure was another glass of whatever was on tap. A wedge of cheese and a handful of crackers cost the saloon almost nothing, maybe a few cents per man, and it kept drinkers planted on their stools for hours. Miners coming off a shift would build little stacks of cheese on crackers and eat a dozen while nursing a single beer, much to the bartender's irritation. It was simple, filling, and quietly engineered to empty your pockets one thirsty bite at a time. Number 23, pickled pig's feet. In the gloom at the end of the bar sat another jar, this one holding pale pig's feet, floating in pinkish brine. To modern eyes, it looks like something out of a nightmare. To a hungry cowboy in 1885, it was a free meal and a cheap one. Butchers practically gave the feet away because the good cuts went to people who could pay. Saloon keepers pickled them in vinegar, salt, and pepper until the skin turned soft and gelatinous and the meat slid off the little bones. A man would spear one with a fork, gnaw the meat and cartilage clean, and chase the salt with beer. The texture was slippery and rich, the flavor sharp with vinegar. They were eaten by lamplight in places where a wrong word could get you shot. Nothing about a pickled pig's foot was elegant. Everything about it was practical, and that was the entire frontier in one slimy bite. Number 22, canned sardines. When the railroads reached the cattle towns, tinned fish arrived with them, and sardines became a saloon delicacy. A flat tin of sardines packed in oil cost around 15 cents and required no cooking, no refrigeration, and no skill. A cowboy would peel back the lid, eat the little fish straight from the can with a cracker, and drink the oil if he was hungry enough. The saltiness, of course, served the bar's interests perfectly. Sardines were considered slightly fancy, the kind of thing a man bought when he had just been paid and wanted to feel civilized for an evening. The smell of fish oil mingled with whiskey and tobacco in 100 frontier bar rooms. For men who lived on beans and bacon for weeks on the trail, a tin of oily fish tasted like luxury from another world, and it fit neatly in a saddlebag for the ride home. Number 21, summer sausage and bull meat. Hanging behind the bar or coiled in the lunch spread was summer sausage, a dense, smoked log of cured beef and pork that needed no ice to survive a frontier summer. Cowboys called the cheaper stuff bull meat, and they were not always wrong about what was in it. Heavily salted, smoked hard, and packed with garlic and pepper, it sliced into firm coins that men ate on bread or straight off a knife blade. A saloon could keep a sausage hanging for weeks and shave off portions as needed. The salt did its usual work on a drinker's thirst. For outlaws on the run, summer sausage was perfect provisions. Light, durable, and impossible to spoil. Many a posse and many a fugitive carried the same hard sausage in their packs, eating identical food while one chased the other across the territory. The frontier did not discriminate by the contents of a man's saddlebag. Number 20. Hardtack. Long before the saloon comforts of cheese and sausage, there was hardtack, the iron-hard cracker of flour and water that fed soldiers, then trail hands, then anyone too broke for better. Baked until every trace of moisture vanished, hardtack could survive years in a saddlebag without rotting. Men called it tooth duller and worm castle for good reason. You could not bite it. You soaked it in coffee, whiskey, or stew until it softened enough to chew without cracking a molar. A single dense cracker delivered serious calories of pure survival, which was the only thing it had going for it. Outlaws hiding out in the hills lived on hardtack for days because it asked nothing of them. No fire, no cooking, no fresh supplies. It tasted like paste and chalk, but it kept men alive between robberies and saloon visits, and on the frontier, staying alive was the entire menu. Number 19. Sobelly and beans. The true engine of frontier eating was sobelly and beans. Salt pork fried until the fat ran, with pinto or navy beans simmered in the drippings. Salt pork came packed in barrels and cost around 12 cents a pound, cheap enough that even a broke gunslinger could afford a plate. The beans soaked overnight, then cooked for hours with the pork until they turned creamy and the whole pot tasted of smoke and salt. Saloons that served real food kept a pot going all day, ladling it out to anyone with a few coins. It was greasy, heavy, and monotonous, but it delivered the fat and protein a working man's body demanded. Cowboys ate it off tin plates balanced on their knees, scraping every last bean. Outlaws ate the same. Beans were so universal on the frontier that men joked they were the official food of the West, and they were not entirely joking. First pattern break. Here is the thing nobody tells you about saloon food. Almost all of it was free, and that was the cleverest business decision in the history of the American West. The free lunch was a saloon institution from San Francisco to Chicago. Buy 1 nickel beer, and you earned access to a spread of ham, cheese, crackers, pickles, eggs, and sausage. It sounds generous. It was anything but. Every single item was chosen because it was salty, and salt sells whiskey. A man who ate his fill of free pickled eggs and rat-trap cheese would drink 3 or 4 beers to quench the thirst that food created. The saloon lost a few cents on lunch and made it back many times over at the bar. Temperance crusaders hated the free lunch precisely because it worked so well. It was hospitality weaponized, kindness with a hook in it, and the hungry men who lined up for it knew exactly what game was being played and played along anyway. Number 18. Son of a gun stew. Now for the dish Eastern visitors could not stomach. Son of a gun stew, which went by a considerably saltier name around actual saloons, used every soft part of a freshly killed calf. The heart, liver, sweetbreads, tongue, brains, and the marrow gut, the tube connecting a calf's stomachs that held partly digested milk. That marrow gut gave the stew its signature richness, a creamy quality nothing else could imitate. Cooks simmered the organs with onions and chili peppers for hours until the whole mess thickened into something startlingly good. Cowboys and the rougher saloon cooks made it only when fresh beef was on hand, treating it as a celebration. It wasted nothing and packed in nutrition that beans could never provide. Journalists from back east wrote about it with open disgust. The men eating it just asked for seconds, because out here, refusing organ meat was a luxury for people who had never been truly hungry. Number 17, chili con carne. In the border towns and the Texas cattle stops, chili was everywhere, and it bore no resemblance to the bean-heavy stuff in modern cookbooks. Real frontier chili was meat, beef, or venison, stewed down with dried chili peppers, garlic, cumin, and onion until it turned dark and fiery. Beans, if they showed up at all, sat on the side. In San Antonio, the famous chili queens sold it by the bowl from open-air stands in the plaza, and cowboys carried the taste into saloons across the West. The heat of the peppers did more than please the tongue. It helped preserve the meat and masked any off flavors in the days before refrigeration. A bowl of red could simmer for hours, getting better as it went, feeding men in shifts as they wandered in from the bar. For a few cents, a gunslinger got a meal hot enough to make him forget how cold and dangerous his night was about to become. Number 16, hot tamales. Outside the swinging doors of countless Western saloons stood a vendor with a steaming bucket of hot tamales wrapped in corn husks. Sold by Mexican vendors for a penny or two apiece, tamales were the original frontier street food. Mesa stuffed with seasoned pork or beef, wrapped and steamed until tender. Drunk cowboys, stumbling out at midnight, bought them by the handful because they were cheap, hot, and easy to eat with one hand while the other stayed near a holster. The tamale men worked late into the night precisely because saloons emptied out hungry, intoxicated customers with money still in their pockets. From Texas up through the cattle trails and into the mining camps, the hot tamale became one of the most beloved cheap meals in the West. It was one of the few foods on this list made with real care and real spice. A small, warm gift from one culture to the rough men of another. Number 15, buffalo tongue. Of all the parts of the buffalo, the tongue was the prize. Frontier hunters and the saloons they supplied considered buffalo tongue a delicacy worth more than the rest of the animal combined, and the demand was so intense that hide hunters sometimes took only the tongues and left thousands of carcasses to rot on the plains. Smoked or boiled, the tongue was tender, rich, and faintly sweet, a slow-cooked luxury that fetched high prices in fancier establishments back east. In the better Western saloons, a slice of buffalo or beef tongue on bread was a step up from pickled eggs and pig's feet, the sort of thing a gambler ordered after a winning night. The trade in tongues helped drive the buffalo to the edge of extinction within a single brutal decade. Men ate the best part of a vanishing animal in smoky barrooms, never imagining the herds that darkened the horizon could ever run out. Number 14, antelope and venison steak. When game was running and a hunter brought in fresh meat, the saloons and chuck wagons cooked antelope and venison steaks over open flame. This was as close to the Hollywood fantasy as the real West ever got, but even here the truth was rougher. The meat was lean to the point of toughness, with almost no fat to keep it tender. So cooks fried it hard in lard or bacon grease to keep it from drying into leather. Venison carried a strong, gamey flavor that men either loved or choked down. A fresh antelope steak was a genuine treat in a world of salt pork and beans, a reminder of why men endured the frontier in the first place. Outlaws camped in the hills, ate well when they shot well, and went hungry when they did not. The land fed you generously or not at all, and a saloon steak made from wild game tasted like a good week. Second pattern break. Let us talk about the word bloodiest in the title, because it was not an exaggeration. The saloons where these meals were served were some of the most dangerous rooms in American history. A place like the Birdcage Theater in Tombstone reportedly took more than 100 bullet holes and saw multiple killings during its run. Men ate pickled eggs and chili within arm's reach of card games that ended in gunfire. The food was served on a counter that might be flipped for cover when shooting started. A cowboy eating his free lunch had to keep one eye on his plate and one on the door because grudges traveled fast and whiskey traveled faster. Eating in a frontier saloon was an act of nerve. You were nourishing your body in a room statistically likely to host violence before closing time. The meals on this list were not enjoyed in peace. They were wolfed down in the most hostile dining rooms the country has ever known. Number 13, calf fries. During spring roundup, when young bulls were castrated to make them easier to handle, the harvested testicles became a seasonal delicacy known politely as calf fries or Rocky Mountain oysters. A cook peeled the membrane, sliced the meat thin, dredged it in flour, and fried it fast in hot lard until golden and crisp. The flavor surprised first-timers, mild and almost sweet, the texture tender. Cowboys ate them with relish during branding season, and saloons near the big ranches served them fried up as bar food when the timing was right. Easterners recoiled at the very idea. Western men shrugged because wasting any part of an animal was simply not done, and a free protein was a free protein. Today, festivals across the Rocky Mountain states still serve them, though most attendees treat it as a dare rather than the practical frontier meal it once was, born from the brutal arithmetic of the cattle ranch. Number 12, canned oysters and oyster stew. Here is the strangest truth about Western dining. Landlocked cowboys 1,000 miles from any ocean were obsessed with oysters. Once canning and the railroads made it possible, tinned and barreled oysters flooded the frontier, and oyster stew became a saloon and restaurant staple from Kansas to Nevada. Cooks simmered the oysters in milk or water with butter and crackers into a hot, briny stew that felt impossibly exotic in a dusty cowtown. Oysters carried prestige. Ordering them said you had money and taste. Mining boom towns competed to serve the freshest shipped oysters, and a bowl of oyster stew could cost more than a steak. The fascination ran so deep that oyster saloons and oyster parlors sprang up in the most unlikely desert towns. Men who had never seen the sea spooned up shellfish in barrooms, chasing a taste of the coastal world they had left behind to chase cattle and gold. Number 11, Hangtown Fry. Born in the California Gold Rush, Hangtown Fry was the most extravagant breakfast the frontier could produce. Fried oysters, bacon, and eggs scrambled together into one rich, expensive dish. The story goes that a miner who struck it rich in Placerville, then nicknamed Hangtown for its frequent executions, demanded the most costly meal the cook could assemble, and the cook combined the three priciest ingredients in the camp. Oysters had to be shipped on ice from San Francisco, eggs were scarce and expensive in the diggings, and bacon was never cheap, so the dish became a way to flaunt sudden wealth. As men drifted from the goldfields into cattle work and saloon towns, they carried the recipe with them, making simplified versions when canned oysters appeared in supply wagons. Hangtown Fry was aspiration on a plate, a taste of money in a world that mostly served beans, and it remains a California classic to this day. Number 10, tough fried beefsteak. The legend says cowboys ate steak every night. The reality is they ate it occasionally, and it was usually terrible. Frontier beef came from rangy longhorns that walked hundreds of miles to market, building muscle and burning away every ounce of tenderness. The result was a steak so tough that cooks fried it hard in grease and drowned it in gravy just to make it chewable. In the saloons and cowtown restaurants, a steak was fried gray, served with beans and bread, and eaten with a sharp knife and patient jaws. It bore no resemblance to the marbled cuts we picture. Still, after weeks on the trail eating salt pork, a hot beefsteak, however leathery, was a celebration. Gunfighters and cattlemen alike ordered it when they had coin, paying a premium for the privilege of gnawing through it. The frontier steak was a symbol of the good life, even when it ate like an old boot. Third pattern break. Here is what modern nutrition science quietly confirms. The frontier diet that horrified Eastern visitors, all those organ meats, marrow, guts, tongues, and calf fries, was actually keeping these men remarkably well fed. Organ meats deliver concentrated doses of vitamin A, vitamin B12, iron, and zinc, exactly the nutrients a body burning thousands of calories a day desperately needs. Nose-to-tail eating, now sold as a trendy wellness movement, was simply survival on the frontier, where wasting any edible part of an animal was unthinkable. The men eating son-of-a-gun stew and fried brains were getting a more complete nutritional profile than someone living on muscle meat alone. They did not have laboratories or dietitians. They had hunger and hard labor, and the inherited wisdom that the whole animal kept you stronger than the pretty parts. The food looked barbaric to outsiders. The bodies it built rode 18 hours a day and lived to tell about it. Number 9. Vinegar pie. Fresh fruit was a fantasy on much of the frontier, but men still craved something sweet, and vinegar pie was the ingenious answer. Cooks mixed vinegar, sugar, eggs, flour, and a bit of nutmeg or vanilla into a custard filling that, once baked, tasted shockingly like lemon pie. The acid of the vinegar mimicked citrus well enough to fool tired, sugar-starved taste buds. In saloon, back kitchens, and frontier hotels, a slice of vinegar pie was a small miracle, tangy and smooth after weeks of heavy, savory food. It cost almost nothing and used only shelf-stable pantry staples that survived the long-haul west. Ranch wives and camp cooks alike kept the recipe through hard times, and a man who tasted it once would request it for weeks. Vinegar pie was proof that frontier cooks refused to let a little thing like the total absence of lemons stand between a hungry crew and dessert. Number 8. Dried apple pie. If there was a single dessert that defined the West, it was dried apple pie. Fresh apples could not survive the journey or the climate, but dried apple rings traveled in burlap sacks for months without spoiling, and cooks reconstituted them in water with sugar and cinnamon until they plumped back into something close to fresh fruit. Baked into a pie, they made the most beloved sweet on the frontier, so common that cowboys grew sick of it and grumbled about endless apple pie at every stop. Saloons and railroad eating houses served slices to travelers and drinkers alike. The smell of stewed apples and cinnamon drifting from a back kitchen could lift the spirits of the hardest man in the room. For all the gunfights and grit, the West ran on a surprising amount of pie, and dried apple was the undisputed king of the dessert table. Number 7. Sourdough biscuits. The sourdough starter was among the most precious possessions in any camp or kitchen. A living crock of fermented flour and water that cooks guarded like treasure, even sleeping with it on cold nights to keep the wild yeast alive. Each morning, a cook pulled off a portion, mixed it with flour, lard, and a pinch of soda, and baked biscuits in a Dutch oven buried in coals until they came out tangy, flaky, and golden. In saloons that served real meals, hot sourdough biscuits sopped up gravy, beans, and stew, and men stuffed extras in their pockets for later. A good starter could travel thousands of miles, passed from cook to cook like a family heirloom. When a starter died from cold or neglect, it was a genuine crisis. That living dough was the closest thing the frontier had to fresh bread, and the sour tang of a proper biscuit tasted like home to men who had none. Number 6. Arbuckles' coffee. No saloon, camp, or kitchen in the West ran without coffee, and the men drank it in staggering quantities, sometimes close to a gallon a day apiece. Arbuckles' Ariosa coffee so dominated the frontier that cowboys used the brand name to mean coffee itself. The beans came pre-roasted and glazed in egg and sugar to seal in freshness. and every package held a stick of peppermint candy. Coffee on the frontier was not a beverage so much as a ritual and a medicine, boiled black and strong enough to stand a spoon in, drunk from dawn until the last hand of the night. In the saloon, it sobered men up just enough to keep gambling and warmed them through freezing nights. A barroom without coffee was unthinkable. It was fuel, comfort, and ceremony in a single bitter cup, and a man deprived of it turned mean in a hurry. The West, for all its whiskey, ran on coffee. Number 5. Limburger cheese. Among the cheeses on the free lunch counter, one stood apart for its sheer offensive power. Limburger, the German cheese so pungent it could clear a room. Frontier saloons in towns with heavy German immigration kept it on hand, and men ate it on dark bread with raw onion and mustard, washing the whole reeking combination down with beer. The smell was legendary, and so was the salt content, which served the bar's purposes, as well as any pickled egg. Eating Limburger was nearly a test of manhood, a way to prove you could stomach anything the West threw at you. There is even a famous frontier tall tale about a hunk of Limburger being mistaken for something dead under the floorboards. Whether or not that ever happened, the cheese was real. It was foul, and tough men devoured it with relish in bar rooms across the territory. Fourth pattern break. Here is the irony that history loves to forget. Nearly every meal on this list, and the entire saloon culture that served it, was wiped out not by changing tastes, but by politics. The temperance movement spent decades campaigning against the saloon, and they understood the free lunch was the saloon's secret weapon. Reformers passed laws in state after state restricting or banning the free lunch specifically to break the bar's hold on working men. When Prohibition finally arrived in 1920, it did not just kill the whiskey. It killed the institution that had fed millions of frontier men their pickled eggs, their chili, their sardines, and cheese. The saloon as a dining room simply vanished. An entire American food culture, built around salt and survival and cheap nourishment, was legislated out of existence in a single generation, and most of it was never written down because it had always been too humble to bother recording. Number 4. The Tom and Jerry. As winter set in, the saloons broke out the Tom and Jerry, a hot, frothy drink that was practically a meal in a mug. The bartender whipped eggs with sugar, folded the beaten whites and yolks into a batter, spooned it into a mug, and topped it with hot water or milk and a generous pour of rum and brandy, finishing with a dusting of nutmeg. The result was rich, sweet, warming, and substantial enough to count as supper on a freezing night. Ornate Tom and Jerry bowls and matching mugs became prized saloon equipment brought out only in cold weather. For a man who had ridden through a blizzard, a Tom and Jerry by the stove was salvation in liquid form, equal parts food, drink, and comfort. The frontier loved it so much that the tradition outlived the saloons, and your great-grandparents may well have served it at Christmas without ever knowing its barroom roots. Number 3. The Prairie Oyster. Here is the one craft bartenders are quietly bringing back. The original prairie oyster, not the calf fry, but the cure, was the West's brutal answer to a brutal hangover. A raw egg yolk dropped whole into a glass, seasoned with vinegar or Worcestershire, salt, pepper, and a hit of hot sauce, then swallowed in a single shuddering gulp. It looked like a raw oyster sliding down the throat, which is how it got the name. Bleary gunslingers and gamblers downed it the morning after, swearing it set them right. The combination of protein, salt, and acid was the closest thing the frontier had to a recovery drink. Today, high-end cocktail bars in New York and London serve elaborate versions of the prairie oyster as a novelty, marketing it as a daring vintage curiosity, with no idea it was invented out of desperation by men who needed to stop shaking long enough to hold a gun steady. Number 2, whiskey soaked everything. By far, the most reliable ingredient in any frontier kitchen was whiskey, and it ended up in far more than glasses. Cooks and bartenders poured it over hardtack to soften it, splashed it into stews and gravies for flavor, soaked dried fruit in it for makeshift desserts, and dosed coffee with it against the cold. Outlaws nursing wounds used it as anesthetic and antiseptic in the same swallow. In the saloon, whiskey was currency, medicine, courage, and seasoning all at once. A man might eat his beans with a whiskey chaser, then watch the same whiskey get poured into the next pot. The line between food and drink blurred completely in a world where clean water was scarce and whiskey was everywhere. It preserved, it flavored, it numbed, and it fueled the gunfights that gave the bloodiest saloons their name. Whiskey was not just on the menu. On the frontier, whiskey practically was the menu. Number 1, the free lunch. At the top of this list is the meal that fed more frontier men than any other, the legendary saloon free lunch. For the price of a single 5-cent beer, a hungry man got access to a counter loaded with ham, cheese, crackers, pickles, pickled eggs, sausage, bread, and sometimes soup or stew, all of it free. For a broke cowboy, a drifting outlaw, or a miner between strikes, the free lunch was often the only real meal of the day. You could nurse one beer for an hour and eat until you were full, and many a desperate man survived on exactly that. It was the closest thing the West had to a social safety net, dressed up as a sales gimmick. The food was salty by design, and the beer flowed because of it. But for the men who needed it, the arithmetic did not matter. A nickel beer and a full belly was as close to charity as a hard country ever offered. The free lunch fed the frontier, and when the saloon died, it took the West's strangest dining hall down with it. Here is the challenge. Pick one of these and actually try it this week. The pickled eggs, the vinegar pie, the Tom and Jerry by the fire. Make something a gunslinger would recognize, and tell me in the comments whether it was as strange as you expected. Because I made the chili con carne the old way, no beans, and I have not gone back since. Tell me which one you are brave enough to attempt. I want to know if the son of a gun stew gets more takers than the prairie oyster, because these were not just bar snacks. They were how the West fed itself between gunfights, one salty, dangerous bite at a time.